All right. Well, good evening. I've got 7 o'clock, and I'd like to welcome everyone here to the first of our Frontier Extension District virtual meetings, focusing on different agricultural topics. Um, no, this is not the way we like to present meetings, but given the situation with COVID and the restrictions that have put on us and having public meetings, we felt we needed to find a way to bring out information to you so that you can stay informed and hopefully bring you some of the latest information to help you out there on the farm. And we've got listed there, as you can see, we've got a series of 6 meetings coming up. And with the exception of next week, which is on a Tuesday night, they're every Wednesday night at 7. And we're going to go through March the 17th. And hopefully that'll get us through the spring series. And then we get back into fall, and next winter we can be having meetings in person like we're used to. I want to take an opportunity, though, to introduce my coworkers. We're working this together as a team. We've got Rod Schaub. Rod, if you want to give us a wave. Rod from our Linden office. We've got Ryan Schaub, Ryan from our Garnett office, and Madison Maurer. Madison, office professional here at our Ottawa office, and she's in charge of communications, and she's kind of been the key to helping us. I'll call it 3-0 Aggies put this together. So we really appreciate that. For our first session tonight, and we're both here on Zoom, and we've got those following in on Facebook Live as well. And appreciate you being here, but I want to introduce our speaker, Dr. Sarah Lancaster. Sarah's been with Kansas State University now for about a year and a half, and we're glad to have her. She's a native of Missouri, and from what I understand, they have weeds over there too. So, I think she knows what we're dealing with. A farm girl that grew up on a diversified farm, and right out of after she got her PhD, worked at Oklahoma State and then went to Missouri State, and we were lucky enough to steal her away and get her back into the position when some of you'll remember Dallas Peterson, who came and did a number of programs here through the years. She took over and is making great strides where Dallas left off. So glad to have her with us here this evening. And with that, I'll turn the program over to Sarah.
Now I can talk.
There we go.
Thank you for that introduction, Darren. I'm happy to be here tonight and looking forward to visiting with you guys this evening about corn and soybean weed management and just some things to think about and some data to look at as we move forward into the 2021 growing season. So if y'all are on questions, feel free to pop them into the chat box. I think Darren and company are going to be monitoring all of those avenues of communication. So some things to think about here as we move forward. You guys probably know that all of our pesticides have to undergo regular registration reviews. So this is something that was instituted in 1996, and it's just an opportunity or a mandate really for the EPA to go through and look at all of the new data that's been developed in the last 10 years on these products. And so atrazine for our corn growers is a super important product and seems like always being scrutinized a little bit. So the EPA released an interim decision. So this is sort of their proposed decision in September of 2020, so just a few months ago. But that is not the end of the process. So that interim decision is going to stand for public comment. And they're also still waiting for an endangered species assessment. And that's not scheduled to be completed until next fall or this coming fall of 2021. So we've got at least probably another calendar year before we're going to know where some of the new labeling restrictions are going to settle for atrazine. I did go through the interim decision and look for some of the things that I think might be of interest to Kansas farmers. And there were 3 things that stood out. All of them, guys, are related to trying to reduce off-target movement of the pesticides. So you'll remember I said one of the things we're waiting on here is this ESA. Endangered Species Act assessment. And so a lot of these changes are related to keeping the herbicide from affecting endangered species. I've also looked through some of the proposed glyphosate re-registration material, and a lot of similar changes are listed there. So I would anticipate that going forward, a lot of our federal labels, or all of our federal labels, are going to have more guidance, more restrictions on wind speed and droplet sizes and things of that nature, just designed to help keep the herbicide where we want it. Some other things related to labeling that I want to talk about before we jump into some more data-driven stuff. Label updates. So some things that might be of interest to y'all: Anthem Flex and Authority Edge now both have soybean labels. That's new for 2021. And something that I talked about this morning with a group out west was the idea of layered residual herbicides. So here we've got Anthem Max with an expanded application window in soybean to use as a layered residual. And I want to draw your attention to this last line here. BASF is anticipating an expanded application window for Residua in corn going all the way up to V8. Okay, this is not approved yet, but when I spoke with my BASF contacts last week, they were still very confident that this will be forthcoming. So thinking about new registrations here, additional new registrations, we've got in corn Impact Core and Sinnate. Both of these products here are based on the herbicide Impact. Impact Core is Impact plus Warrant, so that's an acetochlor formulation. So again, another opportunity or another option here for those layered residual products in corn. And then Sinnate is Impact plus Liberty. So total post-emergent product there for you guys to use in your corn. We did have an opportunity to look at Sinnate last summer in some of our corn trials. And so I just wanted to share with you guys kind of what those results looked like. So here we're looking at weed control 4 weeks after the time of application. So the protocol called for us to spray Sinnate when weeds were 3 to 4 inches tall. And at that point in time, corn was about V4 in our plots. Okay. Here at the research farm, we have a lovely stand of Palmer Amaranth. We also have a healthy morning glory population. There was some velvet leaf in those plots. We plant sorghum to simulate or to mimic shatter cane. And then we had grasses like large crabgrass, some goosegrass, and some green foxtail. Okay. So looking at percent control, my black line here, I'm going to put this on all of my data slides tonight, guys. It's at 95% control. So, you know, we think about 95% control as being just really excellent weed control. So I just wanted to point that out there. So looking at the treatments here, guys, we've got 12 ounces of Sinnate, or I'm sorry, 21 ounces of Sinnate, 21 ounces of Sinnate with atrazine, 28 ounces of Sinnate, and then Impact by itself, Liberty by itself, and then Impact plus Roundup plus atrazine. Okay. So if we look at our target weed here, in this part of the state, it's Palmer Amaranth. So looking at Palmer Amaranth control, guys, this was honestly a pretty mediocre product for Palmer Amaranth. We got good control with our Sinnate by itself on our grasses, velvet leaf, and our shatter cane mimic there. Okay, so it's not a terrible product, but these were not the cleanest plots that we had. The other caveat to tell you here about these plots, so guys, is that there was no pre-emergent treatment on these plots. So these were pretty hairy by the time we got to spraying them. So the weeds were only 3 to 4 inches tall, but they were thick in that plot. So definitely a tough situation to put those treatments out in. All right, so let's see if we can get this thing to work here tonight. All right. So we're looking for the 3 most problematic weeds in your corn crop. If you guys are listening out there and you have your cell phone, or if you are sitting at a computer, you can tell me, you can log into pollev.com/Sarah Lancast 648. So that's the the website, or you could text to this number right here, 37607. That same code, Sarah Lancaster 648. And when you do that, you can tell me, what are the 3 most problematic weeds in your corn crop? I know there's not a whole lot of folks joining us live on Zoom, but maybe we can get just a handful of answers here. Maybe some of my agents want to help us out here a little bit too. See what we can see. Collect some data for some conversation here. We'll give it a few seconds. But y'all are going to make me cry if you are the first group that I do this with and I get 0 responses, just so you know. You'd hate to see that this evening. Oh my word, you guys are gonna I've been shut out. All right, we'll skip it. So in y'all's part of the state, I was anticipating to see things like water hemp, maybe mare's tail. Am I on target there, Darren?
You're exactly on target. I was trying to type that in, but I'm not fast enough at texting. Yeah.
The silence seems long on this end.
Water hemp, mare's tail. Yes. Those are the I will tell you that Palmer Amaranth has reared its head in western Osage County.
Okay.
And then a few places along the Meridazine and along the railroad as you come through Franklin County.
Okay, the railroad is pulling it along.
It has made its way through the Flint Hills, which we've
Okay.
feared for a long time.
So that's something to think about. You know, obviously I was not in Kansas when, you know, we've seen this kind of shift a lot of places from water hemp to Palmer. But, you know, the southern region is dominated by water hemp, dominated by Palmer Amaranth. So I'll be looking forward to answering some calls on Palmer Amaranth this summer, Darren. Thanks for that feedback, though. I appreciate it. It just helps me a little bit to kind of know and to get a feel for how things are changing across the state. You know, one of the things that my colleagues have been saying in other regions, and I've seen here as well and heard here as well, is that we're starting to see a little bit of a resurgence in some of those kind of older weeds. Okay, so, you know, sometimes cockleburr comes up. You know, velvet leaf I see seems to be becoming more problematic again. So we have focused so long on Palmer Amaranth, right? Throughout much of the state, Palmer Amaranth and then water hemp. So these data right here are data that are composited from a handful of corn trials, just looking at different kind of industry recommended protocols. So same kind of setup that you guys saw last time. We've got percent control here on the y-axis. We've got the 95% control line marked right there with that black line. In this case, we're looking at Palmer Amaranth and Morning Glory 4 and 8 weeks after application. Okay, so the 4-week is purple, the 8-week is gray for both of those species. So some things to look at here. For our Palmer Amaranth control, every single one of those 1 pass at planting treatments was greater than 95% control. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about that 95% number towards the end of the evening, but just all of those programs, everything from, you know, Corbis plus Harness Extra through Acuron plus Atrazine, and they all provided excellent control of Palmer Amaranth. What they did not provide very excellent control of, though, was Morning Glory. So there weren't any differences in the control among treatments when we rated it 4 weeks after planting, but when we came back at 8 weeks after planting, there were some differences with the Lexar and the Acuron treatments providing greater control than the harness-based treatments here on the left. Now, if we think about from those same trials, looking at the one pass post-emergent programs, similar story. All of those treatments provided excellent control of Palmer amaranth. Only one of those treatments crossed my 95% threshold for morning glory control 4 weeks after planting. Okay, so again, excellent Palmer amaranth control, excellent pigweed control, a little less desirable morning glory control. And this slide gets busy, okay? These were all of the 2-pass programs. All right, now as a weed scientist, this is where I want to see you guys in your corn programs, these 2-pass programs. I understand all the reasons why you make other choices, but I want to encourage you to think about the fact that there are a lot of advantages to a 2-pass program. So here we have, again, excellent morning Palmer amaranth control across the board. We have a few more instances of some pretty good morning glory control across these treatments, but we also have some instances of pretty sorry morning glory control. Okay, so I'm showing you all of this data kind of in fast cadence here, just to get you guys to think about the fact that we are optimizing our weed control programs for pigweeds, for Palmer amaranth. And that's not a bad thing, right? Palmer is our #1 weed where we have it. Where we don't have it, water hemp is probably our #1 weed. But we can't forget the other weeds that are out there, the mare's tails, the morning glories, the velvet leaves, the cockleburs, that we're not really targeting like we were 10 or 15 years ago, before, the pre-Roundup Ready years. So just some things to think about as you go and plan your weed management programs for 2021, or finalize your plans for weed management programs for 2021. Now let's switch gears and talk about soybeans. We'll spend a little bit more time this evening on soybeans than we did on corn. So herbicide registrations for soybeans, we do have a couple of new labels, but guys, no new chemistry here. No new chemistry. The 2 products that we added to the weed control guide for 2021 for soybeans are Kyber, which is the same products, same ratios as Fierce MTZ. So it's Residual plus Valor plus Metribuzin. The other product that we added to the weed control guide for 2021 is Panther MTZ. Exact same active ingredients, exact same ratios as dimetric charged. So it's Metribuzin plus Valor, okay? So a couple of solid herbicides to add as at planting into the pre-emergent slot in your herbicide program for soybeans. But again, unfortunately, no new modes of action or no new herbicides, active ingredients in those products. So let's see, maybe we're ready for this one. I'm curious to know, I've been asking this question most of the fall and winter. What herbicide resistant soybean system do you think is going to be most prevalent in a frontier district during 2021? Enlist, Extend, Liberty Link, something else? I'm curious to see. Extend. Okay. I'm going to have somebody unmute their mic and tell me what other is. I'm curious to know.
I was referring to Extend Flex, both of them together.
Ah, Extend Flex. Good catch. Good catch. Good catch. Okay. Good catch. All right. So not a lot of Enlist in your part of the state. So I'm guessing that is probably pretty similar to last year, predominantly Extend. Is that accurate, Darren?
Yeah, I think you're correct.
Okay. So when I ask this question other places, a little bit larger crowds, I've been getting more of a like 75-25 extend and list, or 60-70-30 extend and list. Not as much of the Liberty Link system per se. I think a lot of these Liberty Link folks are probably shifting to extend flex to get the Liberty system for their herbicide program, but to get a little bit of insurance for their off-target movement of extend from other sources. So when I come back with Dr. Griffin here in a few weeks, we'll talk about some of those decisions a little bit more. But it's always interesting to me to see what folks are thinking. And I've been surprised so far that I surveyed some folks through the e-update and some other newsletters this fall or this summer, towards the end of the summer. And the numbers really haven't shifted much. I kind of thought maybe once the dust settled with the Dicamba registrations, we'd see a bigger shift back to extend, but in most places that we really haven't. So thanks guys for giving me that feedback. It's a lot more fun when I get to talk with you instead of to you, and that's as close as we're gonna get for a while, I'm afraid.
Hey, Sarah.
Yes, sir.
I think when we look at fields, and I think we really like what the Liberty Link program does. We like the cleanliness, but yeah, the extend, it's the safety factor, because you never know what your neighbor may do. So you do have to have some protection there.
It is an interesting situation, Darren. And like I said, we'll talk about that more when I come back and talk to y'all with Terry. But it's interesting how folks are making those decisions and what the impacts are there. So I do want to take a minute and talk a little bit about Extend Flex. So Extend Flex soybean here is resistant, as we kind of alluded to earlier. It's resistant to dicamba and glyphosate, just like the Extend system. And it's also resistant to Liberty, or to glyphosate, which is the chemical name there. Some things to think about. We will still have straight Extend varieties on the market this year. This makes me a little nervous for guys, and the need to keep good records and communicate clearly with your custom applicators, because Extend Flex soybeans will tolerate the Liberty, Extend will not. So again, just good, clear communication with your seed salesmen and your custom applicators. It's going to be super important going forward for the summer. So some things to think about in the Extend Flex soybean system. These data actually come from Dallas's program in 2019. We had some Extend Flex trials last summer, but they didn't show the treatment structure that I really wanted to share with you guys this evening. So these are 2-year-old data collected here in Manhattan, looking at Palmer Amaranth control 8 weeks after planting, and then the gray bars that are kind of inset within the purple bars, those are soybean yield. Okay, so treatments, we've got a total post of Extendamax, PowerMax, and Warrant. I'm sorry, that's pre only. I'm sorry, pre only Extendamax, PowerMax, and Warrant. Extendamax, PowerMax, and Warrant, followed by Liberty. We've got PowerMax plus Warrant plus Liberty. We've got PowerMax plus Warrant followed by Liberty. So these two treatments don't have dicamba in them at all. Okay. And then we've got 3 treatments here that do not have a pre-emergence component. Okay, so these first 4 treatments had a pre-emergence herbicide application. These last 3 do not have a pre-emergent herbicide application. So we've got PowerMax, Warrant, and Liberty post. We've got Warrant and Liberty post. And then we've got Extendamax and Warrant early post, followed by PowerMax and Liberty late post. Okay. So the obvious thing that we're looking at here is all of these 2 past programs have greater weed control than the one-pass post-emergent programs. Okay. The other thing to look at, while these yields here are not statistically different, you see these gray bars all have a C on them in the two-pass programs. The two-pass programs with the pre had numerically greater yields. And so as we think about, farm budgets, that numeric difference in yield could mean a lot to you guys, even though it didn't play out here in my statistics as being significantly different. And then obviously here, the two lowest weed control, lowest yielding treatments were these ones that just had the one pass post-emergent herbicide programs. Okay, so just some data there to support the push for making sure that we are focusing on our pre-emergent programs. And, I started using this slide set and focusing on the fact, guys, there's no dicamba in these two treatments. Dicamba is a great herbicide. It works well. It is not the end all be all for weed control. Okay, so it's a good program. It does have some baggage, but we can control weeds in this system even without looking at dicamba. At least here in Manhattan, we were able to do that. And Darren, your comments earlier suggest to me that folks in the Frontier District would agree with that statement. So these are a couple of photos from my plots this summer. And these actually came from the Ingenia trials in XtendiFlex. But the thing I want to point out again is just driving home the importance of that pre-emergence application. So the plot on the left had a pre, the plot on the right did not. So by the time this crop canopied, I'll tell you, these weeds were pretty much still right here at this stage. They didn't come through the top of the canopy, that the beans were able to shade them out, but they're still there. And in a lot of cases, guys, these weeds that we're not getting with our pre and then not controlling well with our post because they were too large, if they're not completely killed, they could still theoretically produce seeds. Okay, and again, I'm going to foreshadow a little bit. We'll talk about that some more towards the end of the evening. But the name of the game here is to keep these guys from going to seed. Okay. And so that being said, just a reminder here that product stewardship is more than just avoiding off-target movement. This field was actually just north of my house. I had to drive past it several times last spring, and it was nerve-wracking to this weed scientist to see this field like this. They did come in with a post-emergent herbicide application probably a week or so after I stopped and took this photo. But guys, there was some yield loss that occurred in those soybeans. And what we are doing when we choose to make applications to larger weeds like this is we are just setting ourselves up to burn out this technology to herbicide resistance. Okay. So yes, the off-target movement component of product stewardship for the Extend system is super, super important, but equally important is taking good care that we're not setting ourselves up to select for herbicide resistant plants in our fields. Okay, so the dicamba restriction updates. So hopefully anyone who is planning to be in the Extend or the XtendiFlex system for this summer is aware of the training requirements. That is not written down on this slide anywhere, but I do want to give folks a friendly reminder that you guys every year we have to do that online training. BASF has a training module online. Bayer has a training module online. Quite frankly, the quickest thing to do is to Google dicamba training. And you will find the links to that and you can step through those. They're self-paced. There's a little quiz with them. I took the Bayer version to keep myself legal for spraying this summer, and it took about 45 minutes. So I've been told the BASF version took my students a little longer. They did the BASF version. So you can get your training either way. There may be a handful of face-to-face trainings, guys. There will probably be some live webinars, so something sort of like this where you have an actual presenter, but it seems like the companies right now are really promoting the self-paced training online. So if you have the ability to do that, I would say go ahead and get that done. It's really not too bad. Some of the things that they will talk about in that training. One would be the importance of calendar cutoffs and growth stage cutoffs for application. So for XtendiMax and Ingenia in soybeans, our cutoff date is June 30th, okay? XtendiMax has a growth stage restriction of R1, okay? Not a lot of cotton in the Frontier District. They do have a July 30 cutoff date. For Tavium, Tavium is a little different. It is a combination of Dicamba and Dual. Okay, so we still have the same June 30th calendar cutoff, but our growth stage restriction is earlier in the season. It's V4. That lines up with that application restriction for Dual. Okay, so we've got XtendiMax, Ingenia, and Tavium. Now, the question I always get at about this point in the conversation is, well, what about Fexapan? So what about Fexapan? Initial conversations with folks from Corteva indicated that they were kind of waiting to see what was going to happen with XtendiMax before they moved forward, because you probably remember Fexapan is the same dicamba salt as XtendiMax. Okay. But more recently, I've been told that Corteva is not pursuing a Fexapan label for 2021. So what that means for sure for 2022 through 25 kind of remains to be seen, but we should not plan on having Fexapan for this summer. Other changes on the labels. The buffer on the downwind side of the field has been increased. It needs to be 240 feet. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean 240 feet inside the field. All of those same caveats that we had before about roads and crops in which dicamba is labeled for application and things of that nature, all of those still apply, okay? So you need a 240-foot buffer on the downwind side, and it could contain a lot of things besides just the soybeans on the edge of your field. But 240 feet is a substantial area if you're not able to count roads and rights of ways and things of that nature. The other thing that has changed in terms of the buffer requirement is the websites now have a section for basically hooded sprayers. The Bayer folks are calling these drift reduction technologies, but it's hooded sprayers. Okay, and so if you use a hooded sprayer, your buffer is reduced back down to 110 feet. So you can reduce that buffer. That's a trade-off, right? There's a trade-off there because hooded sprayers, that's another piece of equipment. You're going to need to drive a little slower. You're committed to wider row spacings. So there's a trade-off there. I'm not saying hooded sprayers are a bad idea, but I'm just saying they're probably not going to be for everyone. Next item on the list we'll talk is the drift reduction agent. And the long and the short of that is you need to check the website for all of those tank mix requirements. Okay, now I'm going to skip this for a minute and come back to the volatility reduction agent. But the last item here is the forecast. And basically they extended that from 24 hours predicted to be precipitation free or free from a runoff producing precipitation event. That's the technical terminology there. They extended that from 24 hours to 48 hours. So you need to check the websites at least 7 days before your application. What is on that website within 7 days of your application is what you're legally bound to. And then checking the weather ahead or beyond your application for a couple of days to make sure that you're not anticipating large amounts of rainfall that are going to cause runoff and cause that offsite movement of dicamba either through leaching or through lateral runoff, because dicamba is actually really water soluble. It mixes with water really well, and so it's easy to lose it that way. Now, the item I wanted to come back to here is this volatility reduction agent. That is a new requirement for 2021. Every single application of these 3 products needs to have a volatility reduction agent, or a pH buffer, you might hear them called. And so why are we so concerned about pH in these spray tanks? Okay, so let's do a little chemistry lesson here. I promise it won't be that painful. So why does pH matter? pH matters because dicamba, 2,4-D, glyphosate, a lot of our herbicides are considered chemically, they're weak acids. Okay, and one of the chemical characteristics of a weak acid is that it has this hydrogen molecule that can kind of fall off or be attached depending on the pH of the environment. Okay, so when we formulate the salts of these herbicides, so here's diglycolamine, we use that to our advantage. We replace that hydrogen with this amino group from the salts, with the nitrogen group here from the salts, and we stick it on there. Now, the downside of that is changes in the environment, the pH of the environment can cause this salt to fall off. Okay, so the pH at which this happens, chemists call that a pKa. And so K just stands, it's a term we use for a constant. We just, chemists throw that around. pKa. And for dicamba, the pKa is 5. Okay, so that's kind of the magic number there. And so, you know, that association or dissociation, that form of the molecule, it can be important for affecting absorption of the herbicide. It can affect translocation of the herbicide. It can affect how that herbicide acts at the target sites. It can affect what that herbicide interacts with in the spray solution. And for the purposes of our discussion, it can affect volatility. Because this form here with the hydrogen attached, this what we call the free acid form of dicamba, this is what's moving. This is what volatilizes. So as long as we're keeping our dicamba in the salt form with this extra big chunk added to it, whether that's diglycolamine or BAPMA is the acronym we use for Ingenia, the salt in Ingenia, as long as that extra piece is stuck on there, we have reduced volatility. When that piece falls off and we have that hydrogen, that kind of base acid there, that free acid, then is when we have volatility, okay? So let's think about spray solution pH. It's affected by a lot of things, right? It could be affected by your source water. There's some research out there that has looked at the effect of initial water pH and how that influences these changes. But also tank mix partners can influence the pH of the spray solution. So generally speaking, ammonium sulfate is an acidifying agent. That's one of the reasons why we do not use AMS with dicamba applications. So AMS is an example. Roundup is actually a weak acid. It's an acidifying agent. So when we add dicamba formulations, I said dicamba, when we add glyphosate formulations to dicamba spray mixes, we can actually decrease the pH. And that's what these little lines are showing. So we added, in this case, we added the Ingenia, and then we added a potassium salt of glyphosate and brought the pH way down here to 4.5. Okay. Same thing here. We added the Ingenia first, then we added the potassium salt of glyphosate, and the pH tanked. Okay. When we added AMS last, it didn't change the pH as much as it did when we added AMS first. Okay. So tank mix partners influence the pH of your spray solution. One of the things to look at here, though, is that the dicamba formulation is actually more important than the presence of the glyphosate. So the DGA salt, the Extendamax here, didn't respond quite as much to the addition of the glyphosate. The AMS was actually not very important in terms of changing the pH, but it does impact volatility. It's a different chemical mechanism going on there in the spray tank. Okay. So in order to try to keep that spray solution pH such that that dicamba molecule stays put together, so that that big long extra piece stays stuck on that dicamba acid, we need to add volatility reduction agents, or pH buffers. So Bayer is calling theirs a VRA. BASF is calling theirs a pH buffer. They are actually different products. They're not just the same thing with two different labels. They are actually different active ingredients. Something else that the companies are doing differently, Bayer has chosen to license out their product, their VRA, to a number of different distributors. Okay, so this list, these little boxes with the brown bars here, has grown every time that I have checked it over the last 3 weeks. Okay, so they seem to still be adding formulations of this VRA. Okay, you're going to need to put 20 fluid ounces to the acre in your spray tank to maintain that spray solution pH above 5. Okay, the BASF product is called Centris. The application rate there is going to be 8 fluid ounces to the acre. The last I discussed with folks at BASF, which was towards the end of last week, they still do not have the label fully approved and up on CDMS yet. It's coming, it's there, they're ready, they've got the product, they're just waiting for the bureaucratic wheels to grind through so that they've got a label that they can share publicly there. I wanted to show you guys a little bit of information about these pH buffers and looking at Ingenia. So, and this is a BASF slide, but Dr. Mueller and Dr. Steckel at the University of Tennessee did this work. They've been doing these studies in what they call humidomes, okay? Humidomes, if my mouse will show back up here. All right, humidomes, okay? So basically they're taking a flat of dry soil and they are enclosing it after they apply the different dicamba formulations. They're enclosing that flat of soil and they're pulling air through that enclosure and they're testing that air for how much dicamba is in the air, okay? Now, one of the critiques of this method that we often hear, how many times are we actually spraying completely dry soil in the field? And how many times are we spraying just soil in the field? So, you know, is this a 100% accurate representation of what's going to happen in the field? The experiences with the Extend formulations prior to the VRAs suggest that there's not a 100% match between what we see in these humidomes and what we see in the field. But that being said, the results coming out of these humidome trials with the pH buffer, so here Centris, we are promising. They're better than what they were seeing without the pH buffer, okay? So in this case, they're looking here at different time periods after treatment. So 0 to 12, 12 to 24, and 24 to 36 hours after treatment. And then this axis right here across the bottom is just nanograms of dicamba. So teeny tiny amounts of dicamba that they were detecting in the air around these treatments, but still enough to cause injury, okay? So the thing I want to draw your attention to here is that the Centris did reduce the concentrations of dicamba that they were detecting, okay? I am watching the time here, Darren, and I think we're going to skip this extra little chemistry lesson for this evening. And the last thing I want to say here about dicamba is just that, guys, the legal actions are not over. Okay, they are not over. There are no less, I believe the magic number is 6 lawsuits right now related to the dicamba technology. 2 of them have been brought by ag groups, by commodity groups, because they want fewer restrictions. Okay, so based on what we saw with the previous lawsuits that were settled in the summer of 2020, probably we're not going to see legal impacts on our dicamba systems in the summer of 21. Probably. I don't have a crystal ball. I wish I did. But the legal issues are not over. Okay. So let's talk briefly here about the Enlist system. It's similar to the Extend Flex system with the exception of this 2,4-D choline is the herbicide that is used in the system rather than the dicamba formulations. So Enlist 1, Enlist Duo, the 2 formulations that are available here. Enlist 1 is actually preferred a little bit over Enlist Duo because it will allow you to have greater maximum labeled rates of both 2,4-D and glyphosate in your spray tank. So Enlist Duo is the premix with Power Max. One of the perhaps attractive traits of the E3 system would be smaller buffers, a little less tight requirements on some of the wind restrictions and such. And something else to think about here, they use the term on the Enlist label about do not spray when the wind is blowing towards susceptible crops. So they have a list of susceptible crops and they have a list of crops that are compatible with the Enlist system. And would you believe that soybeans are on the list of compatible crops? There is that much difference in the sensitivity of soybeans to dicamba and 2,4-D. Soybeans are much, much less sensitive to 2,4-D. Something else, I need to work on some resources for y'all related to this sprayer clean out. For both Extend and Enlist, it's important to clean out your sprayer both before and after, before you mix and after your application. So sprayer clean out becomes more important in these systems. One of the caveats that we're hearing about related to the Enlist system is just the importance of paying attention to how you tank mix, making sure you have adequate carrier volumes or adequate carrier in your tank when you start to mix, and making sure that you're adding the ingredients one at a time and giving adequate time for those ingredients to get mixed into the spray tank. So taking a look here at the mixing order, the steps 1 through 7 are nothing special, but what I want you to look at here is step 8. So typically we think about adding herbicides to the spray tank in terms of what their formulation is. Well, in this case, Roundup, Liberty, and Enlist are all soluble liquids or SL formulations, but we still need to add them in the order of glyphosate, glufosinate, and then Enlist. So Roundup, then Liberty, then Enlist, with adequate time to mix between each of those additions. So I've got a student looking at interactions of weed size and sprayer carrier volume and tank mix in the Enlist system on crabgrass and Palmer Amaranth control. He's got one run of the crabgrass study done. These rating data, or these weight data rather, come from 4 weeks after the application. And just, can't get enough good extension data to say that weed size matters. Spraying weeds when they're small, when they're within the labeled sizes, is one of the #1 things we can do to make sure that we're getting good control. Again, I understand all the list of factors that cause that to not happen, but it's still our goal. So some things to look at here. We did see greater weed biomass, so less control. When we got out to the larger crabgrass, we saw less control with the 3-way tank mix, so Liberty plus Roundup plus 2,4-D. And we also saw less control with the Liberty plus 2,4-D, right? That's not too terribly surprising, this Liberty plus 2,4-D result here. But this reduction of the glyphosate control on larger crabgrass by the addition of the glufosinate and 2,4-D is important. Something that I did not address in this talk tonight, but that is related to this idea would be if you're going after volunteer corn control. We sometimes see reduced control or antagonisms with some of the ACCase inhibiting herbicides. So things like clethodim and Assure, Select and Assure that we really like to use for that volunteer corn control. We can see some antagonisms there as well. So just being aware of, perhaps the need to increase rates and use those maximum labeled rates of those grass killing herbicides, those ACCase inhibiting herbicides, is going to be really important if you're going out with them in a tank mix in a Liberty Link or Extend system. Again, let's think about the time here. We've got, well, let's just look at this. Volunteer corn, 28 days after treatment. These data come from Purdue University. But the thing I want you guys to look at here is this 2,4-D plus glyphosate line. Okay, so you're looking at control by clethodim, and each of these squares, you'll see this green line that is the plant growth regulator. So either 2,4-D or Dicamba plus glyphosate has the least amount of control. Okay, so again, just thinking about what you need to do in terms of increasing the rate of that grass killing herbicide. In this case, it was clethodim or Select, Arrow, or some of the trade names you might hear for that product. So paying attention to that. The last data slide that I want to share with you guys today is, again, a field study done by one of my graduate students. Actually, these data come from Ottawa, so right in y'all's backyard. We are looking at Liberty Link soybeans, Liberty Link GT27, and Enlist soybeans, and just comparing some of the integrated management practices in those two systems. Okay, so we had the two different herbicide systems, or two different herbicide tolerance systems. We had two different row spacings in each system. We had 15 and 30-inch row spacings. So there were no differences in weed control among or between the two herbicide systems and between the two row spacings. So 15 and 30-inch rows performed similarly in terms of weed control. We had 4 herbicide treatments. We had one that we called a low input treatment, which was just a pre-emergent herbicide application that was appropriate for the herbicide system. So in the Liberty Link GT27 system, it included isoxaflutal. Then we had what we called a medium input system. And so that was that pre-product plus an appropriate post-emergent product. So either Liberty alone or 2,4-D. And then we had what we considered a high input system. And in this case, we used that overlapping residual herbicide. So we put some dual in with those post-emergent applications, right? Because we talk a lot about the importance of those overlapping residual herbicides. And then the fourth bar there is the hand-weeded check, okay? So things to point out, again, my 95% control line. Once we got into 8 weeks, which is this middle section, and 6 weeks, which is this far right section, after planting, basically when the soybeans canopied, there were really no differences in weed control among those treatments, okay? So as we think about herbicide resistant management, I'm a little leery of these data, but the data say what the data say, right? So I want you guys to think about this from a different perspective. 95% control is fantastic in terms of preventing yield loss, right? We don't expect to see any yield reduction with 95% weed control. But I worked through some math here, just pulled some numbers from the literature, and came up with the fact that escapes in year 1 can result in the potential for adding over 500,000 seeds, each of which could potentially be herbicide resistant, back into your field. Okay, so even though 95% control sounds awesome, and when we think about it in the short term, it is awesome. When we think about it in the long term and what we're adding back to that weed seed bank and what we're going to have to take care of for years to come, especially when we start thinking about herbicide resistance, maybe 95% control isn't the goal. Maybe the goal is 100% control, to make sure that we are leaving fields in a way that, we're going to want to pass them down. Our kids are going to want to have them, and they're going to be able to turn a profit on that land. And the last thing I want to leave you guys with, this came out in the e-update last week, and we talked about it on the radio this morning. If you guys listened to Agriculture Today on the radio, Dr. Jugulum's group screened a Palmer amaranth population that Dallas Peterson found in a long-term no-till study. So it had been 45 years of continuous grain sorghum. Okay, so not a ton of herbicide options in grain sorghum. The most frequently applied would have been atrazine and 2,4-D. Now, let's look at all of the herbicides that population is resistant to. Glean didn't kill that population. 2,4-D didn't kill that population. Atrazine didn't kill it. Glyphosate didn't kill it. Callisto didn't kill it. Cobra didn't kill it. I hope I'm frightening some of you guys. Okay, this is scary stuff. The only 2 herbicides that were successful at controlling this population were Liberty and Gramoxone. Okay, but those were the only 2 that killed this population. The other thing that is particularly troublesome about this is that, with the exception of glyphosate, resistance to all of those herbicides was the result of something called metabolism-based or metabolic resistance. Okay, so just like our bodies have enzymes that help us process, for example, Tylenol, plants have similar enzymes that help them process herbicides. Sometimes we take advantage of that and use that as a mechanism for finding selectivity for herbicides, so crop selectivity. But in this case, we are creating broad cross resistance to herbicides that have rarely, or if at all, been sprayed on these weeds. So metabolic resistant means that potentially we could have weeds in our fields that are resistant to herbicides that we have never even used in that field. Totally rewriting the rules on how we think about herbicide resistance, right? We usually think about kind of like this glyphosate situation where it's a change in a specific enzyme or specific process in the plant, and we've just selected for the part of that population that has that specific change. But in this case, it's totally different. We're selecting for enzymes that break down those herbicides, and those enzymes are going after, we looked at, for example, the hydrogen stuck on those acids. They're going after just little pieces of these herbicide molecules that are similar. And so any herbicide molecule that has that same little piece and fits within that enzyme is going to be broken down by this enzyme, and you're not going to get weed control. So, metabolic resistance really drives home the point that mixing and rotating herbicides is helpful, but not enough. Using full rates of herbicide and aiming for 100% control is important. And anything we can do in terms of non-chemical weed control, whether that is using good good agronomy and having a good strong crop so that it's very competitive, whether that means thinking about cover crops to provide some weed suppression and take some of that pressure off of our post-emergent herbicide applications. Guys, this means that we as crop producers and weed scientists need to take the kitchen sink approach of weed management, because the weeds are taking the kitchen sink approach. They're throwing everything at us in terms of the number of herbicide resistances that they have. So game changer, not good news. All right, so chemical weed control guides, I'm sure Darren and the other agents have got some ready for you at their office. If you are more so inclined, you can also go online and download a copy. And then the other thing that I have been wanting to draw folks' attention to is this project of mine. We're calling it the War Against Weeds. I've been partnering with some weed scientists from Missouri and North Dakota and really having a good time, but talking about some very serious issues like herbicide resistance and integrated weed management. Talking with different university specialists and with crop consultants across the really, we're kind of focused in on the corn and soybean production regions of the country so far, but we'll probably expand out a little bit beyond that as we move through things. So I invite you to look for the War Against Weeds podcast on Spotify, Google, and iTunes. And with that, I invite you to reach out, follow me on social media. If you have questions for me, go through Darren, you can shoot me an email. I really do love working with farmers and look forward to hopefully seeing you guys face to face in the near future. Thanks.
All right, Sarah. Hey, thank you. If there's a quick question, throw it in the chat right quick as we're wrapping up. If not, get a hold of Rod, Ryan, or myself, and we'll get your question to Sarah so she can respond. I do appreciate everyone attending tonight, whether that be on Zoom or whether that be through Facebook Live. Kind of a new frontier for our ag side of things to have virtual meetings. And like we say, we hope this is not the total wave of the future, but maybe something that we can add to our programs with. But we look forward to seeing you back in person in the future. But again, Sarah, we appreciate the information that you shared with us this evening. Very relevant, very timely. Things always changing on the weed control side of things, and just trying to stay abreast of it can be a challenge. Again, I think Madison has thrown the slide back up that has our upcoming meetings, and we invite you, if you have an interest in any one of those or all of them, hey, just let us know and we'll get you the link and get you on. But our next program will be next Tuesday evening, February the 16th. We'll start at 7 o'clock. The first portion of that program will be on cool season grass management, and that will entail both pasture and hay ground. We'll talk about fertility and weed management as it pertains to cool season grasses. And then the second part of that will be on wildlife food plots and detail maybe some mixes and how to manage those and possibly some fertility that goes along with those as well. So that's our next program and be coming up next Tuesday. But again, thank you to each and every one of you for attending. And at this point, I'd usually say have a safe trip home, but I guess rear back in the easy chair and enjoy the evening because it's too cold to go outside. So, hey, thank you, everybody.